So Frost Giant released a new video today about Stormgates. So this one's the Stormgate technology and art reveal. And it's actually pretty interesting. I think it's actually something that people of both a casual and hardcore RTS audience are interested in. Obviously, kind of the technology and behind the scenes, the guts of the game might be a little more hardcore preference, but I think even the casual players will appreciate what this means. And then everyone likes looking at pretty things, and everyone wants to know, a little bit more about what the art style of this game is going to look like. So that's all in this video, which do a little bit of a reaction video. I'm not going to watch the entire thing right here, but just kind of react to some of the more important bits and maybe explain why things are important and why this, once again, is making me optimistic for the future of Stormgate.
Snowplay is a custom-developed engine for real-time strategy. It is a set of logic that is being built exclusively by our team here at Frost Giant, designed to handle the high unit counts and the low latency networking that are necessary to facilitate a really great real-time strategy game.
So first of all, Snowplay, what they're talking about, might not seem all that interesting to people out there who, I guess, don't know what the implications are. Don't know why it's important for something to be designed specifically for things like movement. And you kind of just have to think about some of the more popular RTS games that exist outside of Blizzard RTS. So if you think of Blizzard RTS, StarCraft 1, StarCraft 2, and I guess all the Warcraft games, then one of the things that usually comes to mind is snappiness. The units feel like they should, as well as look and sound like they should, but they also feel like they're going to move the way that they look like they'll move. And when you tell them to do something, they are mostly responsive. I guess the older games aside and the terrible pathing. But even Brood War, there's a certain snappiness to the game that doesn't exist necessarily in I'll say it like Age of Empires, right? Age of Empires has a lot of its own strengths, but I personally believe that one of its weaknesses is absolutely the way that the units feel. Amongst other things, kind of just makes it feel like a more sluggish game. But a lot of people will talk about maybe the size of the units and the formations that are used in a game like that. There is also a lot of stuff going behind the scenes, the guts of the game, that apparently really change up how it feels. Literally, when you open it up and you play a lot of video games and you play one video game versus another and you say, this feels really good. This is basically why this is important. And most of what developing this new technology is catered to do is get a feeling of the game pretty much as close as possible to, well, basically StarCraft 2, but perhaps even better. So to me, this guy is actually one of the most important people at Frost Giant. I know basically everyone who's working there is really important and everything comes together to make a great game and a great product, but this is the guy that I guess you can attribute, not entirely, but a lot of the way that StarCraft 2 feels. Because he was literally there in StarCraft 2. He's actually titled as the game's lead pathfinding engineer for StarCraft 2. So this is not someone coming in with theoreticals who's probably very knowledgeable but hasn't gotten into the nuts and bolts of it and doesn't really know what to do and hits roadblocks all the time. This is someone who's actually been there. Now, there's a fair criticism coming out from people that even if they literally had everyone from StarCraft 2's development team put into a room, the resources still would not be there when you compare Frost Giant, a startup really, to Blizzard, who's not just, billions, millions, whatever dollars, but also has all of the decades of experience and resources that are already kind of cataloged there. And I think that's a fair criticism. It is going to be probably a bit more difficult than just saying, well, here's a bunch of money, do whatever you want. But thing is that, again, with everything that has come out from Frost Giant, I think all of us really believe that they're going to deliver a good product because they know what actually is important to making a good game, as opposed to having the kind of outsiders look in, rather, that can miss a lot of the details, right? So a lot of people can have really good ideas about how to improve StarCraft, but they don't necessarily have that experience building something from the ground up. And basically, you have a lot of the people who did build it from the very beginning actually put into a Frost Giant development team, as well as some of those who can come in from an outside perspective, and that's still valuable. But the fact that this guy, James Anhold, I believe, so I say the name, was the lead pathfinding engineer and now works for Frost Giant is just such a fantastic thing to hear as a fan of the competitive side of the game, but as much as it is very important for the esports and competition that it feels good, let's be real, even the most casual players can acknowledge that StarCraft 2 and kind of Blizzard RTS in general feels very different than, let's say, Age of Empires, which definitely different in a lot of aspects there, but really a lot in the way that they move. So I'm going to be honest, this type of graphic pops up quite often, and I am not technically savvy enough to understand really what it means. My understanding, limited understanding, kind of going back to something you said earlier, was that a lot of the engines right now are necessarily made basically for RTS, which is a lot of units moving. It's more, you know, you think about FPSs, right, or RPGs, limited amount of things that are taking player input, and RTS is a ton of stuff. So I think this is kind of what they're talking about. Certainly they've highlighted more units, but yeah, as far as the actual unit states, transmit and process, player input, transmit and process, yeah, I guess it's just like it kind of starts differently between the two different engines, I guess. So yeah, I don't really know, but if you want to explain in the comments down below, then feel free. But again, for me, it's just really important that they have this technical background and they've also already done it, so they know what to look for and try and kind of hone in on, right, and actually execute correctly.
It'll be the most responsive RTS game I've ever worked on, and I've worked on a few great ones.
So obviously that's easy to say. He works for the company, and he might have been told to say something like that, but I don't know, they're not really about that. And I know a lot of people out there also have criticism of whether us content creators are giving fair reviews about the company and the game, since sometimes the idea of our livelihoods being dependent on it is not exactly true, but not untrue either, and it's always good to be skeptical. But seriously, I really believe that this guy, obviously, he certainly has the credentials to say something like this and for it to be quite impactful, but I also think that it is just true. But we'll see, right? That is definitely something that if we get the game in the future and it just feels clunky and silly and like any other more B-grade RTS, we're gonna look back at this and be like, what happened here? Again, I'm sure this actually makes a ton of sense to a lot of people out there. For me, not as much, but what they go in to discuss after is what this actually kind of physically means for the game.
Snowplay allows us to mass spectate games where the viewer can rewind, have instant replays, and then fast forward back to where they were originally. Because Snowplay is deterministic, we can mass spectate a live game by broadcasting just the player's actions to the viewers.
This I think I understand. These words are digestible for me. So apparently in RTS this would convert to video, which kind of explains the way that StarCraft replays work instead of just being kind of live in game.
And re-simulate the game on their computers. Snowplay enables designers to iterate quickly by compiling all the game logic into WebAssembly so that they can iterate while never leaving the game.
All right, so that was the technical aspect of it, which maybe was a little bit too much for some people out there, but again, the real basic of it is that the units are going to feel a lot like what they did in StarCraft 2, and perhaps even better, apparently, which is going to be quite interesting. I wonder if there's actually potentially a downside to that, honestly, but that's something we'll figure out in the future. But the other things that were talked about are really important for updating RTS into basically the modern esport. Kind of funny because I know a lot of modern esports don't even have replay systems, so better than the modern esport, I suppose. And by bringing it up to the level of other ones, I do primarily mean that apparently you can spectate live games, kind of jump in and then jump out without interrupting the players. This could also open up, watching ladder games. And then they'll have to work out a system to make sure that, professional players can ladder privately or custom game privately. Sure, but this is something that other esports, I think big Dota, right, has done. And then StarCraft 2 basically came out too early. I mean, if you talk about the actual StarCraft 2 development, that's something, way back in 2006, maybe earlier, something like that. So if you're also kind of shaking your head in disbelief and saying like, well, if all these things are possible, why didn't StarCraft 2 do it? It's because StarCraft 2 is basically an ancient game. and not just for its 12 years of being out, but also the development years before that. It's also a game that was founded before what we know kind of modern esports is. It did have competitive esports in mind with their knowledge of, you know, how Brood War played out in Korea, but it didn't necessarily know what was going to happen, you know, pretty much 2012 and onwards, what the current esport sphere looks like. But not just esports, also that combination of the game with the esports marketing for both, right? And that kind of cycle that goes around that makes Dota an esport that seemingly will never go away, right? As long as people play it, and also encourages people to play it by having this really cool esport. So they get to start fresh, and they get to do it right, and they apparently are capable of doing it totally right. So more responsive than StarCraft 2. That's again maybe a downside. I'm really interested to see if there is going to be a downside for that, but let's just say that it's nothing but positive right now. We got rollback in it, and modders apparently will be able to mod a bit faster than any other RTS editors, so people are going to be more inclined to use this one than anything else that's out there. I mean, that's pretty cool. I mean, they sound like they got their bases covered on probably what is the most worrying part, which is, especially for the competitive players out there, how the game feels. So now jumping into the art section of this video, I am going to have a lot more opinions, and a lot of strong opinions, because I feel like this is something that you're just going to have opinions more so about than the technical side of things, where you could kind of argue that's a bit more like facts, like this is good, this isn't good. When it comes to art, that's just, you know, there's beautiful pieces of work will be criticized all the time. Yeah, let's start with this, which is literally, they go on to say that it's inspired by, I think they say Buzz Lightyear, and then an actual F-14 Tomcats. There you go. It is not my favorite. Basically, the entirety of the human faction, what they're calling the Resistance, is not my favorite yet, but neither is the team inside. So that's not really promising. I think that so far, all the concept art that we've seen has been mech-based. So adding lots of layers of mech to something, and that doesn't really inspire me. I know it's kind of weird because it's not like Marines in their suits are that different from what we're seeing right here, but it still feels like, well, basically too mechish. And not only too mechish, but it still feels like someone was heavily inspired by Diva and then kept on working with that kind of artwork, which this less so, but we'll go into the actual mech unit. So I guess it's supposed to be kind of like a bio unit, maybe like a Reaper, which again, the Reaper is encapsulated by armor. So this isn't too different, but it is chonky. It's very chonky. It actually kind of is concept art, so I'm not going to criticize it too much, but, and they don't even know if this unit's going to be in the game, but it is kind of chonky. I understand they're trying to go for kind of like a sleek chonky, what I'm going to call it, but it doesn't really get me super excited. And I think, honestly, what's really not getting me excited is that this looks a little bit derpy. I don't know, the arms look short. I know they're not. They're reaching halfway to the thighs, which is usually the proportion, but yeah, this is okay, I guess. And then, I don't know, taking inspiration from Buzz Lightyear isn't exactly my favorite, but that's fine. Then we have the actual airplane, and I like the airplane, actually. I think this is like closer to what I would expect, like the Banshee and the Wraith to kind of come into in the modern era, and kind of achieves its goal as far as being an air unit that has a unique silhouette and possibly a lot of options for where it's gonna, you know, float from and attack from. So apparently they also pack up kind of like a Viking, which this guy looks like a vulture, actually. Oh, Ziggy's blocking a little bit of it, but you guys can always go and look. So this is called the Gigamech, and this is what I was thinking of when I was talking about that they have seen Diva and took inspiration from that. This looks less like Diva than the mech that was shown on the cinematic, which I also was quite critical of. It seems to have the same kind of characteristics, which makes sense because what Blizzard RTS, or just Blizzard art in general, has done very well is always kept kind of like a theme going, right? So you can look at a unit and say, I think that belongs to this faction, which makes a lot of sense. When you kind of chosen what that is, and then you're supposed to implement it across the board, and that initial thing that's chosen feels like it's from a game elsewhere, and a game that I did not like her design of regardless of their, well, she was a StarCraft 2 pro, now she's not. Like, it kind of fills me with worry. Also, I know, again, they say that this might not be entering into the actual game itself, but this is apparently an idea of what an endgame unit could look like. I'm thinking kind of like a Titan from Age of Mythology, which no one plays competitively, but that's fine. And that doesn't really inspire me with a lot of hope as far as the design of the competitive game, but I'm willing to hold my judgment on that. They do need some really cool things. The coolness factor is certainly still important, but it's just, there's something about the rounded edges, the emphasis on the chest, head kind of combining together. It's just, yeah, it's not my favorite, and I think I'm gonna need to see it certainly more in action and on the ground and from a top-down perspective before I can say that perhaps I'm just being overly critical because, you know, it's not StarCraft or something like that. I think a lot of other people have kind of shared similar sentiments. So in general, I don't necessarily love the grounding of the game, the background, the whole humans versus demons and whatever else they're going to bring in, basically like a Diablo meets StarCraft situation. But again, I'm willing to see it executed because a lot of things depend on execution, right? So I'm holding off on that. But on some of the earlier concept art for the other Infernals, I was, again, looking at it being like, well, it's really, really like Diablo. This one I actually quite like. I can imagine its place as maybe more like an adept unit, actually. You know, it's kind of skinny, maybe it floats, so it might move fast. It's got scythes, so maybe instead of a disc, you know, glaive, it's going to be something that has an AoE attack. I mean, I think this is cool enough and doesn't just fall back on demon equals big, which would be very easy in what has been shown a lot of the time in their concept art, just because they've only shown, you know, like 3 units per faction. That's not a lot to go off of course. But I really liked this one. I thought this was really cool, and hopefully that, you know, it actually continues to be rendered and developed and something that is useful in the game. I really like that they put this in as well, as much as it is understandable that you would focus a lot on kind of the humanoid stuff first, especially since they'll be the units you're going to be interacting with very commonly. I think showing some of the buildings and environment art is also very useful, and it's one of the more underappreciated aspects of the art that exists in things like StarCraft and Warcraft, where, yeah, there's the massive amount of units that you can identify quickly to being part of that faction, but you also have all the buildings that are very clearly Protoss or Elf or Undead or something like that. And they do seem to be kind of mixing a lot together for this Infernals race. I mean, the human race seems to be kind of just general human stuff. We're scrappy. We're gonna resist. Go us. But then the Infernals seem to be a combination of Zerg, because they go around taking up planets for resources and assimilating things that fight back well. And then also demons, obviously, from Diablo. And then this also kind of starts to give me a little bit of the feeling of Undead from Warcraft, right? So darker, pointy edges, ominous looking, there we go. And we'll see it actually move and glow in action when it's implemented into the game. This was also really nice to see them include. I'm glad that they included everything they did for the Infernal side, which is a more interesting demon, the buildings, as well as some of the, what they're calling the charm and levity aspect to a video game, is what it is at the end of the day. But also a video game that is going to be at least slightly cartoony, as I think that's kind of the ideal place to be as far as continuing to have good graphics into the future. If you go too realistic, in 20 years it'll look like shit, as well as just making it very readable as far as a game goes. I think one of the problems with realistic RTS is that then you have to really constrain yourself to what was actually being used, which doesn't leave a lot of room for creativity or strong silhouettes a lot of the time. I also think it's kind of important to have a unit that is just kind of cute and charming, that's not there just to add to an overall kind of depressing effect, that is there to add basically another thing for different-minded people to like. I mean, there's going to be people who really love the giant mechs. There's going to be people who really love the really cool demons that want to rip out your throat. And there's going to be people who love this kind of cute thing that still is ultimately evil, probably, but we don't know quite yet. And to make it the worker, I think just, it does make a lot of sense. The workers have always been a little bit, I don't know, derpier, I suppose, with the SCV's voice lines coming to mind right now. And as far as the actual design of it, I really have no complaints. It's kind of spiky, chiseled, and still unique enough. I'd be very worried if you were to ask me they were going to make someone who's carrying around minerals for the demon race. I'd be worried they'd make a treasure goblin or whatever it is in Diablo, but they have stayed away from that. So it actually looks like it's an evil, demented Charmander. So maybe if its light goes out in its tail, it dies. We'll see. So that's the technology and art reveal. Again, the technology, I have no complaints. Can you have complaints about how they're approaching it? I think you can be skeptical. I think you'd be hesitant to really #hope, you know? But I think it just sounds all good. For the art reveal, again, it's going to be more opinionated. Some people are going to love it, some people are going to hate it. And I'm sure a lot of people out there are going to argue that the Tifa criticisms, again, not just from me, but from a decent amount of people, are maybe too unfounded. You compare and contrast the arts of the two, and it's really not all that similar, and that's fair, but that's just the first thing that comes to mind when I see the Resistance faction right now. Is I actually primarily think Overwatch, and it's just, there's something different that I think I could really try to analyze, get a bunch of pictures together, a lot of artwork from different games, and especially between all the Blizzard games, and again, compare and contrast, but that's not what this video is about. Point is, it's not my favorite quite yet. Perhaps I'm hoping for a little bit more of their own versions of a more agile unit, such as what they showed for the demons, so that we have a lot of variety. Because right now, maybe that's one of the issues. We haven't seen a lot of variety yet, but it's again because they've also shown like 3 or 4 units for every faction. So that will change, and keep in mind, some of these units aren't going to exist in the game. They're going to be completely different when they are released. Look at some of the concept art for StarCraft. Right, so we'll see what actually comes out. We'll see how everything looks when it's being looked at top down as well, which I actually was kind of hopeful for when I saw that one preview image of the potential gameplay, the top down image. I actually thought it looked kind of neat, but right now the concept art for the Resistance, not the Federation, the Resistance, meh. For Infernals, I'm starting to be a believer. So let me know what you think, guys. What are your opinions? How more hype are you? Or less hype are you? And do you think they're actually going to execute a lot of their goals here, especially on the technical side of things? I hope it's as good as they're saying it is. I really do. But remains to be seen. Stormgate going to be releasing some gameplay footage, I assume, soon, as they are looking to have something playable, I believe, next year. And next year is coming up soon. So probably not January, February, or March even, but a little bit afterwards, and that time will absolutely fly by. So thanks for watching, guys, and I look forward to more Stormgate announcements in the future. Bye-bye.